we haven't been able to use our regular room at the museum. We're starting back November 14th. We got a program coming, and I got to get home soon and write that release, show the friends. And anyway, but we've had such a great time. The Richland Library has been so wonderful to us, and so welcoming and generous in providing this beautiful facility that we would miss it too much when we got back to our regular room. So we're still going to have programs here, and sometimes over across the river at the West Columbia branch of the Lexington Public Library. So, I always want to mention, at the end, I'll have free passage for anybody who wants to go check out the museum. You can get several if you want. All right. That next program, our next program is going to be at West Columbia, at the library over there. And it will be about, it'll be ghost stories, because it'll be on the 31st of this month. And that'll be Joe Long speaking. He's done that program here. He's also done it for several years at the museum. So he'll be at a new venue. On the 14th, a couple of times we've had Catherine Ladnier has given lectures. She got involved with military history when she found a bunch of her mother's letters from friends and boyfriends and her father during World War II. And she also found out about met some people who had relatives who were killed in probably the greatest, one of the greatest naval disasters in U.S. Navy history. The sinking of the HMS Rona. Actually, I guess that's technically His Majesty's Navy, but there was American soldiers on board, and there's going to be a film about that that will show on November 14th back at the museum. Our speaker today is Kim Stacy, the British soldier over here who looks like he's had a long hike, but he's on the injured reserve list because he had a fall a couple of weeks ago and had a concussion, right?
Yep.
And so I was worried he wasn't going to be able to make it, but here he is, and I'm very glad. He's going to talk about the Battle of Eutaw Springs, which was the last major battle of the Revolutionary War fought in South Carolina. It happened in Orangeburg, near this Eutawville today.
Yes.
And it was in 1781, September 1781. He has spoken before over at West Columbia about the Battle of Camden, so I know you're going to have a fine, an educational program today. Remember, afterwards, get your passes if you want to, and please welcome Kim Stacy.
Thank you all for coming. So I'm practicing you all since I'm no longer a Yankee. And you'll have to forgive me if I sit for most of this because my back is still out. And the last major battle in South Carolina, this is just before Yorktown. And the British soldiers that were down in South Carolina, half of them that weren't in garrisons up and down the main roadways went to Yorktown and obviously surrendered there after the siege. Anybody who doesn't know Charles Baxley, okay. Charles Baxley is the guy that made a lot of this possible. He was from Camden, attorney and a judge, and a brilliant, brilliant scholar. And he and others put together the Southern campaigns of the American Revolution. And I was in the desert, but I had internet. And I found their website, and they published these online magazines, which there'll be a reference at the end. And that's how I got involved and moved to South Carolina, because these guys said, you got to move down here. So when I got back, I didn't really like Florida, so I moved to Camden. Love it. Small town America. I know my neighbors for the first time, and I already have my funeral plots paid for. So, but Charles Bexley, okay, that was my phone. Oh, wrong one. Okay, these are various organizations in the state that make all this possible. And the 250th, the governor worked with Charles Bexley. Charles Bexley knew everybody in politics and got major funding to do this 250th. And with that, other historic groups sort of spun off on it and started things. For example, we have the South Carolina American Revolution Trust, which now is going to be a hub for a lot of the smaller history places and lecture series to work out of. And they also coordinate funding. And in my case, I volunteer there, but since my wife and I have no people left to leave all my stuff to in my library, I've got a trust where when we're both dead, all my estates and collections go to the trust. So if you have no relatives to leave your stuff to, you may want to consider it. Okay, let me get up and try to walk around. Okay, Greene took over after the brilliant British victory at Camden, and he had to reorganize. He was a brilliant logistics man. Nobody knew if he could actually command in the field. Turns out he was pretty damn good at it. Sure. Can we turn these lights down or off?
Yeah, I can't make out any of them. So, that ain't gonna help.
Better? Okay. So he commands a group of Continentals. After Gates ran, the American forces were scattered. He had to go back to North Carolina and rebuild everything, along with logistics. Because the Americans, let me back up, the British got all their food from Ireland, what they couldn't buy or forage here in the local area. So you're talking 2,500 miles on board ships, and half the food that was landed was rotten, no longer edible. So he has to build this logistics chain, which he did. He was very good at it. And he organizes various companies that were rebuilding, because almost all the Continentals were captured or decimated after Camden, and then later at Hobkirk Hill, which I live on. And so here's just, and I don't spend a lot of time on it, here's a list of the various officers. And do we have Campbell on here?
Yes. Virginia.
Oh, I see him. Okay. And we killed him. Sorry about that. He had it coming.
You mean like Ferguson?
Yeah. Okay. Now he puts together militia, and these guys come and go as they will. And I'm going to have to sit.
Let me put you a chair out here.
Well, no, this is better.
Okay.
So the militia come and go. You know, they just show up and leave whenever they felt like it. So now he has to convince these militia officers to reconstitute their organizations with whatever they could get. They had to find horses, muskets. Most of the militia weren't riflemen, because rifles were the equivalent of a year's pay for an artisan, because they're actually Kentucky long rifles, very expensive, very fragile, and they don't work well in the field. They break too easy. So they would use a lot of captured muskets from the Brits or from the French or Spanish, wherever they could get them. And let's see. Now, that's a picture of the 84th Regiment. That's when they were up in Canada during the summertime. And I can tell you from experience, come on in.
Thank you.
From experience, you don't want to be wearing a kilt down here in South Carolina. Between the chiggers, the ticks, and the brambles and roses and all sorts of stuff, it just makes it very uncomfortable if you're not wearing underwear. And up in Canada, you had the same problem. Up there, the mosquitoes were much bigger than down here because they fed more. And the mosquitoes up there, during the summertime, you can hear them coming a long way off. It sounds like an airplane winding up. So at the British forces, what they have to do is, and I'll show you some maps, all up in line from Charleston all the way up to 96, about a day's march from each place, you had a fortification. Camden was a major supply depot. So things coming out of Charleston on wagons, either drawn by horses they could get them, or more likely oxen. An ox will only go maybe 10, 12 miles. He just sits down. He ain't going nowhere. So they sort of worked it out to get there. Plus, when you get to these way stations, they're fortified. You don't have to worry about raiders coming in like Sumter and Marion coming in at night and causing all sorts of fun problems. So what he does with the British forces is basically he goes to all the units and say, I want all the men that are healthy. In these garrisons, for example, the 71st, right up by North Carolina on the border, 75% of them were sick. Diarrhea, various fevers, malaria, you name it, these guys had it. So they had to pull them away from the North Carolina border and take them down to Charleston, Columbia. So now they go through and say, give us all your healthy people. And so they put them together. Almost all these units were seriously undermanned. For example, the 84th normally had 500 men. It was 5 companies that were down here in the South. And at any given time, out of that 500, only 100 were serviceable. And they also have to get together the Loyalists. And Kruger, the Loyalists are just, they've all been seasoned in many, many battles. I mean, these guys are just as good as the regular British forces. Okay. Now, here's what the road looks like. Some of you probably have gone down these roads. And this is the old wagon road from 96 down to Charleston. And this one's actually a little wider because of modern plows and things like that. It would have been narrower. It would have just been about 12 foot wide. And every time you go through a swamp, if there's no bridge, a lot of times the Americans will burn the bridges or take up the boards just to be a nuisance. And you had to find a way, especially if you're in a swampy area, how are you going to get out of the way of somebody coming the other way? You had to find a place to pull over, good time to take a break, rehydrate, feed the animals. But this is pretty typical of what it looked like. And the trees actually would have been 5 times the size. We hear in various period articles, like in Camden, those tall pine trees, 3 guys couldn't put their arms around them. And it had a very tall canopy. So the sunlight would dribble through, and there was hardly any brush or anything underneath these trees. Just wasn't enough sunlight to get down there. Now here's an overview, and let's see if this is going to work for me. Yes! The Americans come in, and this gentleman put a lot of work into this, so you get an idea of here's where they're forming on the road. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And you have the British, let's see. You have the British on this side, and then the Americans mostly back here. They were 200 yards apart. It takes a long time to get guys off a road, organized, get them to turn 90 degrees, form up in lines, 2 men deep, and move through the scrub in the woods. So even though first contact was about 4 o'clock in the morning, nobody was really in combat positions to do any maneuvering or firing until about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. Depends on who you read. Sir?
Which way is north?
North isn't that way. Well, I messed that up, didn't I? Okay, I'm going the wrong way. There, we're back. Okay, light fingers. I have trouble using my cell phone because of the same thing. Did I delete it? There we go. Okay, north is actually up to where it says Price Drawing. And where the lake is now covers most of this area through here. And at the time, there's no lake. It wasn't dammed up. And the river was navigable right up to Camden, believe it or not. And so you have an overview of who's where. So with the Americans 200 yards away, the idea is they had to get them out of the woods. These areas were cleared for farming for the most part. And 200 yards is 100 yards out of musket range. You'll hear or read about, the rifleman could shoot the eye out of a squirrel at 500 miles. That's pretty common in propaganda writings. A smoothbore musket can hit a man-sized target at 100 yards. I can do it consistently with my musket. The problem is I can't hit you as a target. I'll hit you somewhere in the body, or I'll probably hit the guy standing next to you if I'm aiming at you. So I hope you don't like the guy standing next to you. So you get into about 75 yards, then you can do shooting, but the chances of a hit are less than 50%. And also, it's not like in the movies. Who's seen The Patriot? Some, not all of you. It's a good movie. It's got nothing to do with history. And you'll see everybody lined up shoulder to shoulder. No, that's not how it's done. If you go to our reenactment in November, you'll see them shoulder to shoulder just because. I'm not in charge of that part. And so they're about, if you imagine, my arm's out this way, and the other guy is touching my fingertips with his arms out. And there's a guy about 18 inches behind me. The reason he's there behind me is I'm going to be loading or picking up targets for him to shoot at. And then he shoots, he moves in front of me, and before he does that, while he's loading or looking for a target, I'm his lead catcher. If anybody shoots at him before he shoots, I'm the guy that gets the ball. That's not very friendly. So then you can move forward fast or retreat fast. And what they call skirmishers between that 200 yards in here is both sides send out skirmishers. And what they do is they shoot at each other, but the whole idea is to get back close enough within 100 yards just to harass the various units on both sides. Now, something that's going to be very important as we go is this house was brick, and we're talking 18-inch thick walls, like on my house. I live in a historic house. And it was 3 stories tall. So you're going to have a cannon with shot. Most of the artillery units didn't fire shot. They didn't carry it with them because it was so rare that you had an opportunity to use round ball in the Carolinas. Usually it was grape shot. I should have brought one with me. It would be approximately 9 marble-sized steel balls or lead balls, depending on what they had. And it comes out like a shotgun, sort of like goose shot for you that hunt. Or they would use canister, which is equivalent, if you're hunting, to bird shot. You pick a can, size of a soup can, full of musket balls, rocks, nails, whatever you had handy. And that was used for close-up when somebody was getting ready to overrun you. All right. And feel free to ask questions as I go. Okay, this is an original sketch. I couldn't get a better one of it, but you can see generally, well, I did it again, didn't I? Right button. This was done right after the battle by a guy named Johnson. He was an American logistics officer. He didn't actually fight, so he sat back and put together where all the different units were. This was translated by Library of Congress in a more up-to-date book done for the bicentennial, centennial. And they just organized it a little bit better. And you can see the British line here, and then the American line coming down. Now, either map is not very reliable, and all these maps are different, especially period ones. They're basically going off memory and sketches that somebody else did, and it's real hard to use these for first-person documents, historic documents. Sir?
What are the little triangles?
These are supposed to be the British camp,
Yeah.
but the British camp was actually back over here, and so they had all the tents lined up, and they're organized in a military fashion, of course. And what happens is, you see when the Americans come down, and I'll talk more about this later, they get into the camp. Well, these guys haven't eaten in days. So they're hungry. And they're, pardon my French, buck-ass naked. Most of them didn't have shoes. Their pants were all ripped up and patched. Most of them didn't have jackets. It's not like you see the pictures of a Continental, on parade where he's got his uniform, that he just got out of the box. And the same with the Brits. They were pretty worn out and wearing ragged clothes because for the Brits, they didn't get new clothes. They got it annually, but only in December when the ships landed. And then when they landed in December, like in Charleston, they would have to put it on a cart and bring it up to Camden. And then from there, it'd have to be dispersed wherever they needed to go. Okay, I looked at the maps, and myself, David Rurr, Charles Baxley, Leon Harris, JD, all worked, and we all coordinated together. We all had different pieces. I brought the Brit information in because these guys had never seen the British documents, which is my expertise. And the question was, what was the yardage used? Because depending on who you read, it's all over the place. Some say it was 2,000 yards, some say it was 1,500 yards, but I actually went down there with the little wheel and checked the distances from the Indian Mound to the swamp. And then I scaled it all out, did the math on it, and came up with the frontage of the British was about 960 yards. Now, as the Americans are coming down, they're way out here on both flanks. They're going to have to come in and bring all their guys down here to where the British are waiting for them. So that's going to make their units really chaotic. You got to get one unit out of the way, bring your unit in. Sergeants are yelling commands. The officers are countermanding it. It's just pure chaos. And once they get within that 150, 200-yard range, they have to be organized because the Brits are not playing around. They're going to be shooting at you. Well, usually they'll wait till 100 yards, the Brits, and then they fix bayonets. Most of the casualties in these battles were done with the bayonets. The bayonets wounds were mostly in the back, or if you're on the ground in the front. So as you're running and trying to get away, one of my British soldiers is going to stab you in the back. It beats the hell out of you getting in a fight with another guy with bayonets, because the militia had no bayonets. The Continentals did. They had enough practice. Sir?
What was it about the geography of Camden that made it a good logistics center?
It was on the river. You had the Wateree River that was navigable, and some of the barges, call it high tide if you will, could carry 14 tons on a barge from Charleston all the way up. Now they would have to portage, take it out of the water, where there were rapids, carry it over the rapids. Usually they had pulleys, logs to roll it on, put it all back in. A lot of times they used slaves and black freedmen as bargemen. And these guys would drag it, pole. In some areas further down the coast, they could use sails. And they had smaller boats. Sir?
And if y'all don't know, Camden was the largest and most civilized town heading to the South Carolina backcountry from Charleston.
Port of Columbia.
What Columbia didn't exist.
Yeah. Columbia was just a little way station, a little fortification. And Camden was perfectly located. Plus, it was on the wagon road for Charleston to 96. And to the southeast, you had the high hills of Santee, where Greene is reorganizing before he marches to Eutaw Springs. Okay, one of the big myths is the Provincial Light Infantry. And there's one book out on Eutaw Springs, not bad. Could have done a little bit more academic work if they talked to the right people like me. And it's not bragging if you can do it. So he moves down. Oh, did it again. Okay, he moves down from Orangeburg basically, and following one-lane roads like we saw with the wagon road. And what he does is his men and the British, initially they're about 10 miles apart when they camp at night. And they don't know where each other are, basically. There's really hardly any maps. And so you have to send out reconnaissance forces. And we'll get back to that in a minute. So everybody is hungry, so they send out forage parties. Now with the 84th, they sent out about a third of their men looking for yams. I'm not sure the difference between yams and sweet potatoes. If you know, feel free to tell me. And so everybody's out foraging. They're all hungry. They all need food. They need fodder for the horses. And Major Coffin, crap. Okay. Major Coffin, 140, I'm sorry, I'm reading this at an angle, and 50 cavalry, they're way out front. They're doing reconnaissance. Also, provincial light infantry, this is a hard unit. These guys are mostly 5'6" to 5 foot, maybe smaller. They're marathon runners, basically. I mean, these guys are skinny and hard, and they're incredibly well trained. And it's what they do is they go out on reconnaissance up this road, and they're looking for trouble. And one of the myths is when they first make contact at night, that the Americans killed half of them, took a bunch of them prisoners. A few escaped to go warn Cornwallis that they were coming. That's one of the myths. And they didn't run. What they ended up doing was they would run, literally run, in their small units, usually a sergeant in command. The officers, there's not enough officers going around. These sergeants, they're going in groups of 5 to 15. They're running down the road 50 yards and ambushing the Americans as they scoot forward. And they do this for 4 miles. Now, one of the Americans, and I tried to find the exact quote last night, he's ordered to take his cavalry detachment of 50 men, go up the road, and see what's there. From the reports he had, he knows this is suicidal. Call it forlorn hope. You know, if he lives, he's going to get promoted. He's thinking this, because usually in that, 80% are killed, and the rest wounded. You didn't survive these kind of attacks. So what he does is he goes out there. He's ordered to go, just like when I signed the line for the Marine Corps, and I'm in the reserves, and they wanted me to go someplace nasty. So get on the bus. Okay, I'm going to bitch about it, but I'll get on the bus. This is a picture of the light infantry. You can see the open order. This is a sergeant, and this gives you a rough idea of how they're moving through the woods and the scrub in small units. Oh, wrong one again. Yes. Okay, a little bit background on the light infantry, and I should have taken the other slide out. They're the advance guard, reconnaissance. Their job is to find them, fix them, and I didn't use the other word for this, an F word, but delay the enemy. What they do is they form out, everybody thinks there's more of them, and they start shooting at the rebels. And then now the rebels have to deploy. So they think, oh, there's the British are coming, the British are coming. So now they have to get the men off the road and go onto each flanks, organize them. This takes hours to do. And in the meantime, these guys are retreating, firing the whole way, running, and then re-ambushing the Americans as they go back into column because they can't move through the woods very well. And get back on the road and think how long this is going to take for 2,000 men to get on that road. And then on they go. You know, and the Americans at this point don't think there's that many of them, and they keep going down the road and getting ambushed. Let's see, I screwed up again. Okay, another one of the myths is Green deploys them in 3 lines. You'll see some of the maps. They didn't. What they did is they had 1 line. Some of the historians think of, because there were 2 men in the American line, which is normally how they deployed, was a second line. It's not true. That second line was standing 18 inches behind the first line. And in front, what do they do with the militia? They put them in the front of the line. Marion's not happy about this, so he says, can you guys shoot 12 rounds? Come on, you can do 12 rounds. And that's about all the ammunition they had. It takes a minute to load an American rifle. A British can fire and aim 4 rounds a minute. So if you're standing there and you're 100 yards away, and I get the order to charge with that little pig sticker, 18 inches of steel on the end of my musket, and we've done this in real time just to make sure it was accurate, I will be putting a bayonet in your chest if you're still standing there, or you'll probably wait too late to run, and I'm going to stab you in the back. So that's what they did. The British sent out skirmishers. The militia, they went, we're not having this. My wife's pregnant. The corn's got to come in. No. But depending on who you read again, and basically the militia got off maybe 3-4 shots at long range. So they're out 200 yards, sniping basically at the British line. And even though, they could hit a mark at 200 yards, it's not the same thing as shooting at a person. For those who've been in the military and in combat, deer don't shoot back. Squirrels don't shoot back. Raccoons don't shoot back. Sir?
I've got a question. So these marksmen that were shooting at these people were targeting British officers, causing chaos in the battle, and a lot of the troops didn't have leadership at the time. About 1781, which was the momentum was building.
Right.
The Battle of Eutaw Springs was one of those battles that was.
Yeah, they were always short of officers. There is some truth that they did target officers in various battles. Again, who's commanding these militias to pick out a guy? Like they shot Fraser. Supposedly a guy up in a tree named Taylor. Snipers don't go up in trees because the tree's doing this. You're doing this. You're shaking with your weapon because you're scared. You're probably going to wet yourself and then try to hit this guy. For Taylor, depending on who you read, took 3 or 4 shots to hit him, to hit Fraser. And again, it depends on who you read. The American myth is, they would drop him dead, with the first round.
One more question.
Sure.
Okay, so my wife is actually British, and some of the books that come over from Britain and the officers telling the stories to their commanding officers, maybe the story and report is going to be a little different from the Patriots.
Okay, that's a very good observation. I go back to the primary sources. There really isn't much on Eutaw Springs. For example, there's some good things coming up towards the end of the Patriots applying for their pensions in the 1830s. Now, the word patriot, a little bit of trivia, was never used during the American Revolution. You might have been patriotic, and this is from American documents I've read, but it wasn't until lawyers started writing these pension applications that they started using the word patriot. It had become in the lexicon of soldiers that fought in the Revolution. So what they did is they just formalized it into the present lexicon. But if I have to spend an hour explaining that to everybody, I'm going to go way behind. So where am I? So at the officers, they're always short of officers. And again, the officers weren't standing out front. They're actually commanding from the rear. And they're using drums and fifes to move their men around. And the sergeants are standing on the flanks in between the regiments. So they're yelling, aim to the right. And the other sergeants and corporals are going to, at the same time, yell, aim to the right. And the drum's going to beat. And every drum call in your sleep, what you're going to do is aim to the right. So this is a robotic dance that they do. So early on, with the British officers out front, like Bunker Hill, one of the officers of the 84th, Major John Small, if you see the painting of the British attacking Bunker Hill, you see it everywhere. I got it on my computer screen. What they did is they were leading from out front. And the officers took 50% casualties. Major Small got a ball through the hand and it never healed because that ball is about 3/4 of an inch. And it went clear through his hand, and the type of wound, we didn't have modern wound care, till he died. And he died in the 1790s as a governor of Guernsey, the island of Guernsey, but it never healed. And a lot of these wounds these guys would have would never heal. Question, sir? So now we have, when the British, they're pulling back, trying to reorganize, and that front's collapsing. Because here's the Americans coming down, and they're coming in smaller and smaller down this funnel. So when they get to the British camp, they're going to pillage it. They're looking for shoes, clothing, and they get into the rum. These rum barrels on the wagons held 66 gallons. Now the rum is about 190% alcohol. You heard of Bacardi's 151 or Everclear, if you're an old ex-hippie like me. You drink that, the British would always water it down, and usually the British would too. And you were given an ounce, and you would mix it with 2/3 water to dilute it. And normally, if you were a good sergeant, you made sure the guy drank it in front of you. So they weren't filling up their canteens, getting drunk, and then going on guard duty, falling asleep, and then somebody gets killed. And with the frontage, I talked a little bit about that. Okay, the consortium, Southern Campaigns of the American Revolution, redid these maps. And there was a lot of archaeology done, too, to update this. Because you read the books, you look at the maps, they're not very accurate. You're trying to put all this together. And this is the most accurate we have to now. We're still not done. Okay, here you see the American line. This is about 200 yards distance. So what they did was the Continentals on their right flank, these guys were hardened soldiers. They can go toe-to-toe in a bayonet fight. So what they're doing is they're pushing forward within 100 yards, shooting, and with fixed bayonets, trying to scare the British to retreating, which they do in good order. All these British soldiers, again, very hardened, very experienced, pull back maybe 25 yards just out of musket range, form, turn around, and shoot. And they'll go back another 25 yards, shoot at the Americans as they're coming up. Because a group of men in open order, double open order, you can't keep a solid front like you see in the movies or at reenactments. So they're just cluttered all around the place. So you go 25 yards back, turn around, and shoot at them. So you're just whittling them down as you go. And this is going to take a couple hours to do. Now you get back here, this is where the camp actually was more accurately. And right through here is the brick house. And all around it was wooden palisade. What that was trees about, 18 or 12 to 14 inches, and driven in the ground just like a frontier fortification. And that way it had loopholes where they could shoot at you as you're trying to surround it. You saw the same thing at Fort Mott and other places. Now here it says 900 yards distance. Well, that's wrong. It wasn't. It was about 200, and that's one of the myths. Now, the reason the frontage is English is funneling down, as you can see here, how it's funneling down, is there's an Indian mound here, and that anchors basically the British line. If you try to put these guys up on this mound, they're just going to be everywhere. It's just going to be chaos. So down here was heavy woods and heavy scrub. And trying to get through that, the Americans just talk about how difficult it was to move through that terrain. Now up at the top, where the lake is now, right up through here, this is a swampy area, so that's anchoring the British line. Right through here, where Marchbanks is, there's like a sunken road. It's where the riverbed had been. It's about 10 feet below ground level. So these guys, what they do is when it's time to skedaddle, they go down this hidden road, and the Americans don't know where they went. Now these groups on the Americans have to try to stop, reorganize, and try to follow them. And the whole time, you see how this is funneling them down. So they're just getting back to back, and it's just total chaos for the Americans. So they hit the camp. The British are actually reforming back here. And the 84th and some cavalry and stuff were in reserve. So they're called up to fill the gaps in the road. And here's the main road, the Charleston Road. And so the 84th originally comes up and plugs the gap. They have a cannon with them, and that gives these guys more time to retreat. And with the cavalry, now what the cavalry comes up, and they're here on the road, these guys don't like big horses and guys with sabers, big knives. And you see in the movies, they're trying to shoot off the back of a horse. If you've ridden a horse and tried to shoot anything off the back of the horse, one, Horses don't like the noise, even if they're well trained. And what you're doing is you're trying to aim this thing, doing this. So they're using sabers, and then I've got some really good juicy stuff for you on that. So let's go to the next one. Okay, this is a blow-up of the area. I just did this so you had a better idea of where the Americans were, just in case you asked. And nuts. There we go. And right button, here's the road. And they bring up 5 guns. It varies on how many guns they had. With the British, they said it was 7. They're including swivel guns that were in the brick house in the window. The artillery normally took care of things like that, swivel guns, and then they would partial it out wherever it was needed. So depending on who you read, depends on how they're going to break up these facts on it. Question? Louder, please. He is actually up here. He's not on here, but he's in reserve up here. First he's here along the road because they thought they'd make a charge down the road. That was going to happen. So what they do is they move him up to the flanks, and they thought they would catch the British up in that ravine as they're trying to retreat. And again, the British are trained to take care of the cavalry. What they do is form a square. And if you imagine if there's 10 of us shoulder to shoulder in a square, and we're 2 deep, and we got all these sharp pointy things, and one guy's on the ground as blocking the bayonet, the other guy's standing there like this. I should have brought my musket with the bayonet. Anybody knows horses, when a horse sees something like that, he's going to roll up his big eyes and he's going to go, oh hell no. They're not going to do it. I mean, the cavalry, either or, are not going to break that square. It's suicidal, basically. Because either side, and the Continentals would do the same thing. But now you got the guys in the back shooting at you the whole time. The horses are trying to run around this thing. Let's see if I mess it up again. Okay, this is another version. This is actually a blow-up of where it was. It gives you a better idea. And this is the Brits when they pushed back, reorganizing. And at that point, the 84th is over here. They went back from being up here, back down the road, and then went to this garden area. And there was a lot of orchards and stuff around the outside of the palisade, and a lot of scrub, too, along the bank. So the 84th, these guys, they weren't up there and hide in the woods and organize themselves, reload their muskets, and they're just waiting from American to stick his head up. Here, it's a little bit more accurate, the brick house. Here's the wagon road. And here we got green. Some historians claim, the reserve, Washington, and I can't remember off the top of my head, the other group is here before they move up here. Question?
The Harry Lee?
Yes. And so they move up here, and they're coming down this way later on and try to attack the brick house. They didn't do well. It was really stupid trying to go through a palisade and 18-inch thick brick walls with people shooting at you. And what they would do, if you're in the window, the guy in front of you shoots, he turns around and goes to the back. The next guy's already loaded, he's shooting. So every 3 to 4 seconds, somebody's shooting at you. And they would just keep doing this. And then they had the little swivel guns, where it's like little shotguns. So taking horses, what's he going to do? Oh, thick fingers. What's he going to do with horses when he gets here? And what you read in the American journals is the cavalrymen all wanted the glory. They wanted to get stuck in. They wanted to get into combat, and kill people and capture things. So they would all have their name in the newspapers and the gazettes. Not smart. Okay, I call this the bad idea. This is, don't Don Troiani, famous artist. I've known Don for decades. I usually work with him on authenticity, on what the British soldiers are wearing at any given time. And this is the American Dragoons coming in, and they're hitting the scrub, the orchards, and these are actually guardsmen, which weren't really there. And but a unit looked just like that. And here you're trying to guy, you know, look, he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys trying to stab him off the horse. Not a good day for him. So here we go, and I gotta move back a little bit here. Here's some of the quotations, mainly from the Americans. From the brick house, from the windows they poured destructive fire upon the enemy, and they stopped the further progress. Although severely checked, the Americans, this is from Stedman, he's British, were not discouraged and brought up 4 6-pounders, could be 4, 5, or 3, to batter the house. It's not really going to work with the ammunition they had. And most of the officers' men that were attached to it were either killed, we're talking Washington, or wounded. Washington got lucky and escaped. In its confusion, it had again formed a line and was received with great spirit. So the cavalry, to their credit, these guys were brave, went back, reformed, captured the horses that were running wild. A lot of the guys just got knocked off their horses. And so if they escaped from the British, they would run back to where they're reforming and get back on a horse. Didn't have to be theirs. Oh, I did it again. Okay. Another place happened just outside that brick house was a group of the Washington's cavalry. Here we go. Right button. A group of soldiers that had been captured early on. A lot of these guys got away from their unit. They may have been out in front in picket lines, but didn't get back to their units and were captured. Well, what you do with the POWs is we don't put sandbags on their head like we were wont to do, and which I said you can't do that anymore because it's inhuman. So they reformed and in charge 3 times the same suicidal charges. And they really got hammered. Now, one of the Americans, who was a quartermaster general, in his narrative, I found that a part of the column which was thrown down their arms and surrendered, finding themselves relieved for the presence of those whom they surrendered to. This would have been basically the militia, our Continentals, had no other troops in their way. So they brought all these British POWs in one place. Now, what happens is the Americans leave them alone. And they leave them with weapons and ammunition. So, another bad idea. So they resume their arms. Nuts. And they reform. And what happens is, in the old field, displayed means they organized into groups. And now he's in the rear and commenced to fire on him. So he's there with all these POWs going, where is everybody? And all these British are grabbing weapons. And it's like, time to leave. Okay, the casualties. It'll vary depending on who you read, but generally these are the accepted ones, more or less. The Americans' total casualties was 579. Probably more than that. The wounded guys died later on. The Americans, it's hard to use any records because they didn't keep any. And what they did was captured by the British. Sometimes you find the American documents in England or up in Scotland. And if you were wounded, if you lost a leg, you had a 25% chance of surviving it. If it was an arm, about 35%. They could take a leg off in 15 seconds. That's how fast they could do it. I didn't want to gross everybody out. That's a different lecture altogether. And so most of these wounded, half of them are going to die from their wounds. And then missing and captured. The missing, these guys are mostly dead. They went off into swamps and drowned, just ran home, said, enough of this, I'm not doing it. And the total we think were killed was the 579. That's the closest we can get, but that's a fluid. Now the British actually took more casualties in overall. And make sure I get the right button. This is pretty close to what you'll find in most of the documents. 85 were killed, wounded. Again, half of these guys are going to die later on. And missing and captured. The rooting parties, each unit sent about a quarter to a third of their men out foraging. And a lot of these guys were just captured. Some ran away. Their guards only had like 6 rounds with them. So these guys had, canvas bags and pulling up these sweet potatoes. And they're not armed. So they have to have their guards, which was usually anywhere from 6 to 12 men, with only 6 rounds to protect them. What do? You run. But a lot of them were captured. Oh, did it again. So out of the 500 missing and captured, most of those guys were on the rooting party. Now let's see what happened. And here we go. The 84th journals, and we have a number of journals for the 84th. Actually, the 84th has more extant diaries, journals, and order books than any other regiment. And I know because I have every page of them. And here's another way we can tell the time. You can see on the second paragraph, about 7 in the morning, they hear the muskets going off. That's the Provincial Light Infantry 4 miles down the road. So now they know something big is coming. And then they're ordered to form and 200 yards away, so that's pretty consistent. And like I say, every regiment of ours were out strong rooting parties. None of them joined their units till the action was over. These guys basically were hiding in the woods and swamps. And except for the 84th, those guys all escaped and got back to their regiment. Now, with timing, we know 8 in the morning, they're forming. And they know it's coming. They're getting the artillery pieces up the road mainly. And they're in reserve. Just, I kind of find a less colorful phrase. Just standing there, scratching their heads and scratching their behinds, waiting for something to happen. And again, these battles take normally hours to organize. And the actual combat is usually less than 30 minutes once combat actually starts. And think you got to move all these guys around the battlefield and the range of the weapons. Okay. Whoa. Come on. Okay, timing again. Down here we know, wrong button. Okay, about 11 o'clock, they're starting to move forward. We know that the Dragoons were up on the road. The Dragoons are with the 84th. They're moving around, trying to get where they're going to be needed. And what happens in the diary is we know exactly how many men the 84th lost because we have the diary. And a lot of these battles written by British officers were published in Scotland and in England. And one of the questions always is, which are more trustworthy? And if you're in the intelligence business, you have a rating system like 1 to 5. And what that happens is the British officers saying, yes, sometimes they would glorify their participation, always a little bit of politics with them. Because after the war's over, the rebellion, they're going to have to go on to the next war. So in the next promotion, usually they have to buy it, but if it's meritorious, they don't have to spend thousands of pounds to get promoted. So the 84th, and 1 captain, 1 lieutenant adjutant, 8 sergeants, and 2 drummers, rank and file, are the regular enlisted men. 4 men were fit for duty, mostly rooting parties. I misread that. Most of them were on battalion duty, again, likely out there with the forage parties. And they had a total of 88 men that were combat ready, and 1 cannon. Oh, I think I lost a sentence on the slides this morning. So 1 captain was killed, officers. We don't know how he was killed. We just know he was the commanding officer and was killed, and a young captain lieutenant, or lieutenant, had to take over. And he did a really good job, according to the journal. So he's writing the after action report. It's going to his boss. His boss is going to rewrite it. And then his boss, Cornwallis, is going to rewrite it. And they're going to send these back to the UK to be published. Now, the American ones, if they had any documents at all, were very good at propaganda, making stuff up. I wanted to use an S word, but that would be impolite. And what we do have of the American journals and stuff, you could weed out what's more or less a after-action report, if we have the documents at all, or they would get it published in various newspapers. So they would write this up. I was in charge of this unit, and my men fought gallantly to the last man, except for him. They never seemed to be the last guy killed. And so for propaganda purposes, this is great for the Americans. And one of the things I tell people is a new nation needs to have a history. And it needs to propaganda to make that legend or folklore that then can be sort of historically tied with accuracy. But if you're reading the newspapers, you think, oh, these guys are just brilliant. They're great. All the militia, were shooting people at 500 yards. And it just wasn't so. But yeah, the British, their documents are highly reliable. And you can cross-reference them, which I do constantly. Okay. I put this in just for your gratification. These are American pensions.
We got about 4 minutes left.
Okay. That's a sword wound to his face. And you can see how tough it's going to be with that kind of surgery, trying to reconstruct his face. They couldn't do that till World War I. Here's all the dead bodies. So what we have is a list of wounds, head wounds, hand wounds, mostly by sabers from the British Dragoons, and bayonet wounds. Again, more swords to the head. And this is basically when the Americans are in retreat. So the cavalry is harassing them as they're running. And what they do is with the sabers, it's a back cut or a forward slicing cut. So they're coming at you, you're running, you've probably thrown most of your stuff away, especially from militia. You want to be fast, because these guys on the horses are coming fast. One guy had been wounded numerous times. That's dedication. And then on the bottom, Eutaw Springs, bayonet wound through the body and a sword wound to his wrist. Okay, speed this up. Here's the references. Ta-da! This book is not bad. In a sense, after Charles died, we put a lot of things on the back burner. I would go ahead and buy this book. Buy it used on Amazon, and spend the $6 or $10 for it. I think it's like 20 something if you buy it, brand new. I hardly ever buy brand new. The American The American Battlefield Trust, their website is here, and they have a couple vignettes on the Battle of Eutaw Springs. Southern Campaigns of the American Revolution actually is now part of the American Battlefield Trust and the Southern Carolina American Revolution Trust. So what we're trying to do is get these documents up and running online through this trust. And it's simple to remember, sc-art.org. The Journal of the American Revolution, professional and amateur historians like myself write articles. They're all peer-reviewed. They have extensive footnotes. And if you go to the site and just type in Eutaw Springs or whatever you're interested in, I think there's about 8 or 9 articles on Eutaw Springs. Now, YouTube. I'm addicted to YouTube. And if you go to YouTube and it's got a search engine, you can just type in American Revolution and just go shopping. There's a lot of lectures from professional historians and authors at places like in D.C. where they would lecture, or at a university, and they're online. Some of my stuff is online from the Francis Marion Conference a few years ago. But type in Eutaw Springs, and there'll probably be 20 videos will come up. And also a lot of the reenactors, and this was after the internet started, so I was still analog, actually have, they talk about the rifle versus musket. And they talk about these day-to-day activities, what soldiers went through, and what's myth and what's not. Like we talked about the Patriot, they're all shoulder to shoulder. Cannonballs are sliding through. And they'll critique the movie, basically frame by frame. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. Now let's see if this actually works. It's supposed to come up. No, it's not going to work. I tried to put music in it, but it didn't work. Here's my email. Feel free to send me a nastygram if I don't get back to you in a few days. I get busy. Sometimes it'll go a few days. There we go. Actually, I should be standing for this. The king will forgive me. I guess I'm going to have to get out the textbook and figure out how to make it so the sound comes automatically. Yeah, I was just trying it.
And all the Yanks know it, but they use the wrong words, right?
Well, yeah, they decided since they couldn't write their own music, they had to steal ours. And if we go back real quick to, you'll hear the American version. Let's see if I can get up there fast enough. Okay, hit the button, please. This is Chester. This is the American version of God Save the King.
There it is.
No, never mind.
Oh, well, sorry about that.
I have the wrong one up there. I fixed it after I sent them the slides. And you can hear the drums and the fifes. When the battlefield, when everybody's shooting, you get this fog of war, literally. And you can't see 10 feet in front of you. Sometimes you get one round off. You got to wait for the wind to clear all the smoke out of the way. One of the reasons these take a long time. And so every soldier knew every drum beat and every fife call. So he wakes up in the morning, reveille, and it's time for sergeants call, officers call, pickets to go out, firewood and water call, and in between that they have to go make a head call, go to the latrine. And the Americans learned from the British, if you build the latrines downstream, the water tastes better in the morning. Yeah, you can just kill that. Okay, questions? Sir?
Yeah, when people who went missing, seemed like fairly large numbers on both sides there. Is it safe to assume a lot of them were deserters? And if so, what happened to them?
A small group,
Assimilate back into the
yeah, a small group would change coats easily, especially if you deserted from the British Army. But you knew if you got captured, they were going to hang you. And especially with the Americans, they would join the British because they got fed and they got paid and new clothes. But they knew if they got caught by the Americans and they found out they were fighting for the British or as loyalists, they would be shot. And on another level, and I haven't published this yet, and I've done a lot of work on it, there was sort of an informal exchange of enlisted men. Because you've got, what are you going to do with 500 prisoners if we say they're caught? So what are you going to do? You got to march them all the way back to North Carolina on a road, and they're going to be sneaking off and going back and rejoining their units. Another thing what they did, and this was common and not regulation, is they would have informal exchanges. I've got 200 of yours, you got 500 of mine, here, take your 200. We'll give them a piece of paper that's a promise of parole that they won't take up arms again. Just go home. And they would march back to Charleston and reorganize, wherever the army was. They'd go back to Charleston and then find out where their regiments were and then go rejoin the regiments. There was the formal exchange. Now, paperwork and politics, mainly among officers. The British officers in Charlestown were given parole and liberty of the town. But they had the promise